much, and it is a great privilege to launch the 24 Policy Outlook. Why? Because it gives us a evidence-based scientific foundation for what is a very hotly discussed topic. And indeed, I think it is important for us to make a distinction between the urgent and the important. I do think there's a great risk these days that because this is so urgent, teacher shortage is so urgent, that we aim for quick fixes, to plug in holes in employment with decisions that we may regret in the long run, and that we forget the important, which is the transformation of the teaching profession to what are very, very different demands. So I do think that's going to give us a rich context for discussion, but we have a solid evidence base that helps us understand the challenge of the teaching profession, but also look at ways how we can support teaching quality in this moment and strengthen capacity for evaluation and monitoring and understanding, what is happening and what needs to happen. So that's really, I think, an important thing. It's not easy to be a teacher these days. You need to model the future today that you want to see in your students tomorrow. And you will not always have society on your side. Parents are very skeptical when they see students learn things they do no longer understand, or when yet their students no longer learn things that was very important for them. Sometimes as a teacher, you see your colleagues teaching how they were taught rather than how you want them to teach. And as a policymaker, you can lose an election when something goes wrong in this field, but you rarely win an election because it just takes a lot of time to translate good ideas into better outcomes. So it is really tough to be a teacher in this world. And you need to help the next generation keep the world in balance. On the one hand, foster sustainability, helping young kids make better trade-offs between the present and the future. And we were able to do, and at the same time, living in a world that is structurally imbalanced, where you have to reinvent yourself every single day. Well, what do we expect from teachers is not, so difficult to understand. And the first thing is you want to help the next generation understand, why you are here on this planet. What is important to you? What would you like to contribute in this world? Now, you want your, generation, the next generation, to understand where they can discover their, sometimes hidden talents, where they can become really, really good at. And that is not a trivial exercise. As a teacher these days, you don't just have to be a good instructor. You need to be a good coach, a good mentor, a good facilitator, creative designer of innovative learning environments. Now, those things are necessary to help, individuals understand, where they can become good at. But that alone makes nobody happy. What makes people happy is usually make a difference to other people's lives, to the world. So what does the world expect from you? And this is where you can see many education systems fall short. Now, school has often become a bubble that is disconnected from the outside world. Now, whereas school needs to do a better job, and teachers need to do a better job in helping young people understand what the world expects from them, and ultimately, how to translate better skills into better jobs and better lives. So that is what, and these demands are rising. I mean, that is very, very clear that the expectations on education, on schools, on teachers are rising and have substantially risen. So let me just, highlight a couple of issues. What about Singapore from, international assessments is that they do extremely well on academic outcomes. Now, they always come out on top, in problem solving, in science, in math, in literacy, and so on. That's what we easily see, what we judge teachers for. The first thing that, you're expected to do as a teacher, help a young person, become very, very good at those kinds of things. But, when you scratch the surface, you can see Singapore still has some big challenges to address. The orange part, psychological well-being, sense of belonging, student identity is not that great in the case of Singapore. And this is what you're expected to work on as a teacher today. Parents, students, everyone expects that you find good balance between the well-being of students and academic performance. Emotional resilience. Singaporean students have a hard time to adjust to changing circumstances. They have a hard time organizing their life beyond school, the school leisure balance. So again, and those are demands that we place on teachers. You can look at the, almost the mirror image of Singapore, Albania. They get 10 out of 10 points on psychological well-being. They are the happiest children that we have among all of the countries. But you can see they struggle with academic performance. So it's another kind of, set of challenges that teachers in this country face. And some people will say, well, maybe we have to make a choice. Either we become all like Singaporeans, we do very well academically and end up unhappy, or like the Albanians, we focus on well-being and then we compromise academic performance. But it's interesting. It's interesting when you look actually at Denmark. You can see it's a country that has got pretty much everything right. Now you can see they're doing pretty well academically. Kids are happy. They show a good level of agency and engagement. Now the green bar, kids know how to mobilize their cognitive, social, emotional resources. They know how to do things because in education, they do things in instruction. They do the experiment rather than just listening to teachers, talking about an experiment. They're resilient kids. They have good social relationships. They're open to different ideas and perspectives. So, it is not an impossible task. We can see actually, and Denmark is not the only country. We see a handful of countries that have become pretty good at developing balanced outcomes. But what is very clear is that from a teacher today, you expect more than the yellow bar. You expect more than just delivering academic performance. You expect them to really take care of all of that. And that makes this job incredibly challenging because our support systems for teachers have not very much evolved. They're still very much focused on the top line. So let's look at why this is so important. Let's look at some of the future trends that teachers will see in the classroom. The first one is one that we see, very clearly around us, in this country, neighboring, you can see all this armed conflict on the rise. And in other world regions, it's something that has happened for decades. So, and these things end up on the doorsteps of classrooms. In terms of migration, you can see very clearly labor migration, asylum applications, they are on the rise. And once again, that ends up on the doorsteps of classrooms. And sometimes we don't make it either. The way kids are assigned to schools sometimes concentrates those issues on specific classes, to specific schools, making it really, really hard for teachers to manage. But it is the new reality. And those kinds of forces also lead. Look at the rise in protectionism. We going to a world that was interconnected, to a world where we're building walls. The kind of me first attitude that we have in our economies, building silos, building walls. And once again, you can see that reflected in your classrooms. We see that young people have a much greater propensity to move their jobs. Today, you do not educate for a specific work. Learning is the work. And the capacity of your students to learn for jobs that have not been created, to learn to use technologies that have not been invented, to address social problems we cannot imagine, is becoming the key, and not being siloed into specific jobs. People are quite ready to move now. Very, very important kind of insights. Inequality, for a long time, it looked that, between country inequality has risen. Now it's declining, and that's maybe the fruit of, an interconnected world. Countries have become more equal, but within countries, we see rising inequality, at least over the last decades. And this is, again, translating into, social inequality, and social inequality translates into your students coming from different backgrounds in your classroom, rising heterogeneity. It is a reality that you're going to see as a teacher directly in your classroom, increasing kind of student diversity. Some people argue, democracy is in decline, voter turnout diminishing. Maybe that's not the only way of a democracy, but certainly one indicator. And once again, economic polarization, skills polarization, democratic kind of polarization are all interconnected. And to some extent, you can see that in voter behavior. Now, look at the rise of populism. If you add, the far right and the far left and the populists, you get about a third of people in the European area, 31 European countries, who are opting for, what are, extreme solutions. So again, that is a reality you're going to see in your classroom as a teacher tomorrow. AI, we are going to talk about it separately, but clearly it's a force that's shaping everything around us. Look at, medical devices now coming in, technology getting better than humans. The kind of things that are easy to teach, easy to test, become easy to digitize, to automate. Again, another set of challenges for teachers. But the counterpart, you also see in the classroom, smartphone addiction. Our latest PISA results showed that smartphones have got into the way of young people to learn. They can no longer concentrate. They have, lower levels of life satisfaction. All of those are the counterparts that you as a teacher will see in your classroom. That is not some abstract number here, but you're going to see the students, addicted to social media and all those kinds of things. It is a reality that you have to address. And sometimes education systems, don't help you very much. They say, oh, well, you can negotiate that with your students, or maybe your school leader will help you with this. But often teachers are pretty much on their own. There are very few countries that have coherent system level policies on those kinds of things. And, maybe not surprisingly, mental health is now the top concern when you ask people among the 31 countries for which we have data. Now, everything else, has almost seen a decline. So it is, again, something, as a teacher, finding that balance between the cognitive, social, and emotional outcomes, not, achieving academic outcomes at the expense of student well-being, but through student well-being. Now, that is the challenge you face as a teacher today. Now, a lot of things are well established. When we surveyed countries in the education policy outlook, you could see, most people will say, changing demographies, digitalization, equity, those are all topics that we are recognizing as a high or very high in priority. When you ask them, what are you doing about it? You can see there is often a significant knowing-doing gap. Demography is the most surprising one. Demography is not a surprise. Actually, we know how many children are born. We know where people move. We can actually predict, teacher demand pretty well, but, they're not doing that often. Or look at, the gap on health. Look at the gap on international conflict. There is great awareness about it, but little preparation. There is this knowing-doing gap, and that is what our policy dialogues are about. To share good experiences and practices on how we can close those gaps, ensure that what is important actually is reflected in the actions that we do take. Let me just, highlight a couple of challenges. The first is that we see across the board pretty much that, the share of low performers is on the rise. And that is a real concern. We don't see, dramatic changes in average outcomes, but we see a polarizing of skill distributions. Now, when you look at the share of people who do not even reach the baseline in proficiency. Teacher support, also, we have some really interesting data just, published very recently. You can see, and it's not surprising, when your student feel intimidated by your teacher, you're probably more worried about doing well in math and science and anything. Or when you think that your teachers at your school are mean towards you. But on the positive side, you can see that there are many ways in which the quality of relationships between teachers and students diminish students' anxiety. We often have that sense, schooling is too tough on young people. We ask them to solve too difficult problems. We see no relationships between the demands placed on students and their anxiety. That is a simple myth. The relationship comes through the lack of teacher support. So the question is how you can build that culture of high demand, high support. If students believe, my teachers will be excited when I come back in 3 years to see them, those students are less worried about math. And it's, again, quite intuitive. If you feel that your teachers know who you are, if you feel your teachers, know who you want to become and support you on your journey, you'll probably be much less worried about solving problems that you do not know the answer for today. So it's quite intuitive, but very important for us to see those kinds of pictures. And often, education systems lack effective support. The more frequently students experience their teacher to be supportive, the more they show proactive learning behavior. What I mean by this is basically learning behavior where students can set their own learning goals, where they can manage their learning processes, where they have ownership over what they learn and how they learn and where they learn. That's what you want to achieve. It's not enough to give students specific knowledge and skills in schools, but you want them to be self-managed learners who can actually, throughout their life, expand their horizon. And you can see that attitude is very, very closely linked to whether students perceive that teachers help them with their learning, they provide extra support, they continue teaching until all students understand, and things like this. So the perception of students on the quality of relationship is a powerful predictor for what we see in the learning behavior of young people. Now, we need to keep that in mind. Now, when we look back to the pandemic, you could see on the right side, teachers did an enormous amount of work to give students material, video lessons, all of this. There was a big effort made on most teachers during school closures to provide students with material. But when you look at the kind of things I just mentioned, the quality of social relationships, you can see the bars get much shorter. Look at the last one. During the pandemic, you had only 13% of students who say, my teacher asked me how I am. Not a difficult question to ask, but one that got lost in education that becomes increasingly transactional, where we actually focus very much on, pushing material onto students, but not on building that level of support that children and youth need and look for these days, and that predicts the kind of learning behavior you want to see. So this is really what I think teaching for tomorrow is very much about. Just a brief reflection on teacher shortage. You can see when you look at data from 2015 and you compare that with 2018 and 22, in most countries, the perception of teacher shortage has become a lot worse. In many countries, more than double. And that's not necessarily always the reality. That's just what school leaders perceive. There's a bigger problem now than there used to be in the past. But what you can see is that it is real. You talk about, in many countries, half of the school leaders who say there is teacher shortage to an extent that we can no longer give proper instruction. We, misallocate teachers from across subject areas and lots of things like this. So the problem has become, certainly bigger. And when you look at, where do people go? You can see in the education policy outlook, it's no longer retirement, that's the dark blue bar, but it's resignation, and people just look for other jobs. Now, it is not so clear to what extent that is a problem. Maybe we should, say goodbye to this idea that teachers stay in their job for their life. Maybe it's becoming the new normal. People want to change job. We have seen that before among young people, But again, if that is the case, it is important to adapt our policies to this, that we have more inroads into teaching and more ways for teaching to go into other professions if that is their choice. But first, acknowledging that reality is very, very important. Actually, many people basically say, look, I do this for a while and not for my life. And you want them to do that for the right reasons, not the wrong reasons, that they don't have the support and so on. Now, how to fix that? The first thing, we always think is money, paying people well. And you can see when you look at comparison with workers with similar qualifications, teachers generally don't fare very well. In most countries, pay is less than what you would get in other professions. But don't think this is an answer to teacher shortage. You can see Luxembourg, paying their teachers extremely well. They have high GDP and pay their teachers even more than what you would get in other professions. And Luxembourg is a country, we will hear that, I'm sure, with great teacher shortage. So money hasn't been helpful. Finland is a counterexample. They don't pay their teachers well, but they have 8, 9, 10 applicants for every post. So I think the point really here is that money is always an extrinsic demotivator. If you don't pay people, they run away. It's very, very natural. But money is rarely an intrinsic motivator. No. Certainly not for teachers. No. You cannot buy, that kind of engagement. No. This is something, it's about making teaching intellectually more attractive, not just financially more attractive. There's another interesting picture on that. Look at this. Here you can see basically the relative teacher salaries, how well are teachers paid on the vertical axis. And then on the horizontal axis, an indicator of teacher job satisfaction. No? We asked teachers, do you think the advantages of being a teacher outweigh the disadvantage of being a teacher? And you can see countries are all over the place. No? Korean teachers are paid very well and think, teaching has been a great choice. That's quite plausible. No? French teachers are not paid very well and see, teaching is a misery. That's also understandable. But then you look at Portuguese teachers. They're actually paid very well, but they think, teaching has not been a great choice. Or you look at teachers in the United States who are paid very poorly and think teaching has been a great choice. Now, so it is not clear how money plays into this. Once again, trying to believe that you can fix teacher supply with, changes in salary schemes, I'm very doubtful. There's not much evidence you find from international comparisons to support that. Ultimately, it's this, to what extent does society value the profession? You can look at Singapore, at Korea, at Finland, at Mexico, Canada, and so on, where most teachers feel, my work is valued by the society around me. But you look to the Slovak Republic, to France, to Sweden, where you have, 1 in 5 teachers who believe that what they do every day is appreciated by the people around them. This is what we need to change. And again, as you saw, money is not a very promising route to address it. No, very little relationship between that. So these are issues I hope you'll find good answers. No? And finally, we need to get better at planning for the future. Now, when you look at the, share of education systems that look at, demography and so for workforce shortages, you can see, in school education, there's some effort going on. No? But when you look at pre-primary education, early childhood education, and most importantly, adult education, you see that most systems say, no, we don't even, do those kinds of analysis in areas where they're actually quite simple to do. So, that's the last chapter of the policy outlook. We need to become better at, evaluating, planning for the future. Very finally, just look at a couple of challenges. One, I highlighted in many instances is technology around you. This is the time that students spend learning on devices. In blue, that's basically what the teacher does with them. And then the green part is using devices for leisure, using your own smartphone and your tablet and things like this. And you can see that in many countries, students spend a big share of their time on devices now. Their digital world has become the real world. Now you can see on the extreme, in the case of Ukraine, students spend more time on devices than they spend in the classroom, not by choice, because many schools are still closed. But you can see, in Denmark, Bulgaria, Italy, we're not far away from that. So once again, the digital world has become the real world. And what teachers do is only part of the picture. The device for leisure use is in some countries almost as significant. Now the question is this a good or a bad thing? And the answer is not so clear than we often think. When you look at, for example, the time that students spend on devices on the horizontal axis and learning outcomes, you can see there's a little bit of a relationship, positive, and there's very little use, but it is pretty flat overall. So yes, some teachers are doing an amazing job in leveraging technology. Technology can always, amplify great teaching, great practice, and so on. But, it's very hard to see technology replacing poor practice. And so this mixed picture results in an overall flat line. I can show you there are some countries where it looks better, where you can see clear positive relationships. So you can get that right at the systemic level. But you also see countries where technology intensity relates consistently negatively to outcomes. It's a lot, I think, we can learn from and with each other. What is consistent across countries is this. Now, technology for leisure, using your own smartphone in school is not a great idea. You can see there's a consistent negative relationship. And it's not just with cognitive outcomes, it's also with student life satisfaction, with student anxiety, with all of those things pretty well predicted by the extent to which schools allow and use smartphones in their classroom. Why do I show you this picture? Because that reality is ending up in your classroom. In many countries, there are no systemic policies. There are decisions that you as a teacher need to make about those things every day. You confront the problems, you can't solve them. And even if you solve the problem in the classroom, you still have the home use, what kids do and with devices at their home, of which you see the consequences the next day in your classroom. So it is one of the most fundamental challenges. That's why we devote a fair part of the report to those kinds of things. When you look at teacher stress, what makes teachers stressed in their work? Interestingly, working with students is not a big driver of stress. It's a little bit of a relationship of spending more hours with students or having larger classes and things like this, and the perceived level of stress. But the relationship is not that strong. It gets stronger when you have, things, and particularly when you look at administrative work. That's what gets teachers stressed. Doing things that do not relate to what you believe you're there for. You got into this job to work with kids, not to work with students, to change their lives. And then you end up doing, paperwork. And that's what they don't like. And that was driving the stress. And that's where technology could be at its best. Even if you do not use it in the classroom, we have seen the mixed effect before. There's a lot that technology could do to connect you with your colleagues, to help your professional preparation, all of those. And we're going to see here presentations on this later on. It's a lot that technology can do. But once again, if you look at the reality, as a teacher in many classrooms, you have to work with 6, 7, 8 different systems every day that are not compatible, that can't share their data, so you can't use the power of learning analytics. All of those things stand in the way. So once again, the promise of technologies and the realities in the classroom can be very different things. Now, often things do not work. Right? Technology can be a great aid to help you, make learning more granular, more adaptive, more interactive. Why would you listen to your teacher talking about the result of an experiment when you can do that in a virtual laboratory? All of these things are possible. And some of the countries here, if you look to Korea, the digital tutors, they're pretty close to the frontier of doing this. Equity and inclusion. Students with special needs never had the opportunities they have today, enabled through digital technologies. Teacher quality. Efficiency, research innovation. But there's also a long list of things that we need to address, the digital divides that currently are also still a reality, the performance of tools. Many of the tools that we use in schools are things that your children would not voluntarily play with. That is, I think, part of the reality that often performance is poor. The question of bias, is technology going to help teachers reduce their biases or amplify them? And so on privacy, data protection, you can make this list long. And again, many education systems have not solved those issues at the system level, which means that schools and teachers have to do that locally. And that, is an incredibly difficult task. So lots of things to solve. That's really what this publication is about. It helps us to understand what is urgent, find interesting and promising solution on the urgent. Some of the countries around this table have actually been very innovative, very creative in addressing teacher shortage in the short run. And I think we should learn from this. But we should also, not lose sight of what is really important to ensure that teachers these days are truly empowered, that they are the drivers of teacher professionalism, that they work with a high degree of professional autonomy in a collaborative culture, empowered by technology in their practice. Now, I think that the risk that we focus on the urgent and lose sight of the important is something that we will pay very, very dearly in the long run. And last but not least, become a bit better in planning for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andreas, for giving us the big picture and these global trends for the coming 5 years, and especially for the development of this report and for the publication. I will now invite Wong Siu Hong, who's advisor to the Ministry of Education from Singapore, to take the floor for your reaction to this presentation and also to share with us the Singaporean experience.
Thank you, Joel. Good morning, colleagues. Responding to Andreas and complementing his megatrend, big picture sharing, I'm a teacher and talking about teachers, teaching and education. Of course, let me start with a pedagogical story. So there's this teacher, we shall call her Mrs. Helen Lim. She's working with a group of 9-10-year-old students. She's not teaching mathematics. She's not teaching them science, nor social studies. She's having a class activity under the umbrella of citizenship and character education. And in this class, she said, okay, let's do pair work. Today, let's talk about the future. Let's talk about, what your strengths and weaknesses are, what you like about the future, and what you want to be in the future. What is your ambition? What is your aspiration in life? So she broke the class up and they have a very, very interesting discussion. One of which was a pair called, and we'll call them Alex and Charlie. So Alex said, okay, let's do this activity. Charlie, tell me, what do you want to be when you grow up? Charlie thought about it. I want to be an astronaut. Oh, nice ambition, Alex said. Good. Tell me, what do you want to do as an astronaut? And Charlie said, I want to be the first man to land on the sun. Wow, very lofty, very ambitious, thinking. Alex, being the smart alecky kid, know that that's not quite possible. Gave us very, smart alecky smirk and say, but Charlie, do you know that the sun is too hot for a man to land on it? You will melt. Charlie said, Alex, don't be silly. You think I'm silly? I'm going to land on the sun at night. Thank you for laughing. This story, the moral of the story is just to exemplify the very complex roles that teachers have today. And in Singapore schools, we do a lot of this now. The kind of pedagogical approaches have changed. It's no longer didactic, instructive. The teachers are employing all kinds of pedagogical repertoire to engage the students, to help them think, help them talk. We're talking about creative ideas. We're talking about critical thinking. We're talking about communication skills as demonstrated by Alex and Charlie. We're talking about, helping them discover themselves, the social emotional learning and the competencies that we want out of our students. So it is a very, very complex world, a very different type of expectation and almost a revolutionary change in the kind of roles that teachers are expected to play in the classroom. Indeed, based on Andrea's presentation, I think we're all quite convinced that the world is changing very rapidly. We are facing a VUCA world that is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And how do we prepare our students to grow up and to thrive in that kind of future? The teacher is key. We need our system, the curriculum, to be forward-looking, to focus not just on strong fundamentals of literacy and numeracy, and that's what we all can do, have been doing, but also on elements like character, strength of character, resilience, adaptability, on social emotional learning, on social emotional competencies. You know yourself well, you know your friends well, you know how to relate to everybody else in the world, but also what we call future learnings, the 21st century competencies of communication skills, of info technology skills, of creative and inventive thinking, of multicultural literacies, of civic literacy, and whole works that will determine how well our students can thrive in the world if they not only have the strong fundamentals, but future competencies of the type that I am alluding to. Very, very tall order. How do we do that? Teachers is of course key. We are trying to revamp the teachers' work in the classroom. We are trying to develop new sense of identity of teachers, not just as I am the math teacher teaching you mathematics, but I am the mentor, I'm the coach, I am, helping students grow in holistic ways in much more multifaceted world to get them ready for a very, very, very complex world. That call to action is indeed a difficult one. And in Singapore, we have spent the last 30 years working on major and massive teacher policy reforms to try to get to where we are today. Number one, recruiting the best and the ablest to become teacher, a very difficult task. As Andreas have alluded to, we have to put in a lot of work to try and make sure that the best and the ablest of our young people want to join us in teaching. And that is very, very closely related to how society sees the role of teachers and whether society respects teachers. Because if there's no respect, no young people will want to come in. So the work there has been quite interesting. We did a lot of publicity about what teaching means, the sense of mission, the work that teachers do, how they can make a difference. And those are the kind of things that speak to young people. As Andreas has put it, money is not the loudest talking element here. It is the sense of mission, the sense of the ability, the intrinsic motivation to want to make a difference to other people. And that call is in itself a very noble call. But having said that, I want to say that money, pay, salary is important as a hygienic factor. If you don't pay the teachers well, even whatever sense of mission that they may have, you are going to be hard put to try and get some of the best and the brightest to come in. Once they come in, it's just all about the training, the professional knowledge and professional competencies they built up. The in-service training is important. The pre-service training is important. The in-service training is important. We built a whole network of professional learning and development where teachers own their own professional development. Teachers teaching teachers to how to become better teachers, because that ownership is indeed very important. We build career paths for the teachers so that I know we have got people who would like to see their career as short, but we see teaching as a long-term career. 30 years, 40 years. I'm a teacher of 40 years, and I've been in the profession for 40 years. And I speak with the kind of passion that says that we can be in the profession for 40 years because we see the mission, because we keep continually being developed, and we have got a career progression that allows us to be the best teacher, to be a master teacher, to be a specialist in certain areas of professional work, or to become a school leader and to do leadership work and management work in the field of education. The career paths provide the opportunity for a long-term career where people can continue to contribute to education in a manner where they feel that they can make a difference. So there are a lot of different areas of work where it's been really, really fulfilling for us to be working on to arrive at a system where our teachers feel that society respect them, they have a strong teacher identity, they have got newfound pedagogical skills that are different from when they were a student receiving instruction. Now they become the better teacher to prepare the students for the future. And most importantly, with that very, very passionate sense of mission that they are here for a cause to get the next generation of students ready for the future. So on that note, this is what we've done in Singapore. I'll be more than happy to engage all of you and talk further about some of the details of the work in later sessions throughout the day today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wong, for sharing your experience and your wisdom from Singapore. We now move to a panel discussion with the participation of the chairs of the 4 committees at OECD. The aim of this discussion is for us to gain some further insights into the changing roles of the teaching profession with the contribution of the level 1 bodies of OECD, and also for us to have not only the sharing of the concerns and of the projects under development in each of the committees, but also for us to discuss together our better interaction and to gain insight from the panel, from the plenary discussion that will follow on how OECD can assist the countries in a better way. So this panel will be composed by myself. I'm sorry, it's a different hat in the next 5 minutes, by Mr. Wong Siew Hong, again, now with a different hat as chair of the TALIS governing board, by Ms. Michelle Brunix, chair of PISA governing board, by Jeroen Baks, vice chair of SERI, and then I will invite again Andreas to provide also a reflection from the OECD Secretariat on this topic. So let me start as chair of EDPC and share with you some of the main projects and areas of discussion and concern that we've been having at the Education Policy Committee. Of course, I could start with this event. I could start with the ministerial, the education policy reform dialogues, and the preparation of the last and next ministerial is one of the main areas of action of EDPC. By sitting together the country delegates from all the OECD countries and also associates and observers, we have an excellent opportunity to share, to discuss policy, but above all, to prepare these meaningful and substantial meetings where we can address the heart and core of the policies that have to be developed. Many times we think of OECD as just a data provider. EDPC collects data and then publishes reports with data, but we've moved beyond that role. We are at, and this is something that EDPC is requiring, is that not only we have these loads and loads of quantitative data, but we also have more and more qualitative discussions. At the last two committee meetings, we organized a tour de table for all the countries to express their burning issues, and also in the development of work together with the SERI governing board and with the other committees, we have been identifying new pathways for OECD to work together with the countries and to work for the countries and with the countries. And it is very obvious that we are seeking more guidelines, more orientations, more reflection, not only on what works, but how to do it, on the implementation, on the effectiveness, on getting from general and common policies to what actually works in each classroom, on work together with teachers and with students. And for this reason, I'd like to highlight in my 3 minutes, I have to be mindful of my own time because now I'm moderating myself, which is a difficult role. But let me start with a bit of history. TALIS, and let me make a link with your work, Wong. TALIS is a unique program in international organizations because it's made only of teachers' voice. And the father of TALIS is EDPC with the project Teachers Matters a long time ago. And it was the observation that we could not discuss the teaching profession without the insights of teachers themselves that TALIS was born. But I'd like to draw your attention to, not being exhaustive, some of the projects that are being developed under EDPC. The very important set of work and reports that are regularly published on resources, especially on digital resources and human resources in education. These reflections we're having here on how technology and artificial intelligent impact on teaching and education are one of the core subjects that is at the resources area at EDPC, but also because this is very much interrelated, as we heard in Andrea's presentation, on the organization of time, on the configuration of the work, on how schools can be organized and resources aligned to the needs. And these not only comparative reflections, this is about comparisons, but this is about collecting evidence that can help us in knowing what is effective. The area of EDPC on equity and inclusion. And again, this is the main quest from the ministerial declaration for us not to lose sight that what we do in education, that education systems are not quality, do not have quality if they are not inclusive, if they don't foster equity. And the EDPC projects are addressing the issue of capacity for equity. And this is very much related with this Education Policy Outlook report, because in addressing teacher shortage, there is the risk of recruiting staff with low qualifications or making sure that all classes work and taking away support from the students with special needs or who are at more vulnerable situations. So the development of capacity for equity, for achieving the goals of equity, is a very important area that is under exploration in this project. I'd like also to draw your attention to one of the main projects of EDPC at this moment, in which many of the countries participating in this event play a very active and important role. The Global Forum on the Future of Education and Skills 2030 has some very important features. It's the one multi-stakeholder project in which policymakers, teachers, school networks, and students have a voice. In the first part, in the first years of this global forum, we have developed a learning compass, thinking of the future, reflecting on what are the sets of knowledge, attitude, skills, values that the curriculum has to embody in order for students to thrive in the future. And this led to the definition of a learning compass that is now being complemented with a teaching compass. So the discussion right now is, what is the profile of teachers that we need in order to make sure that the learning compass is followed by preparation of teachers to address these challenges that Andreas also mentioned. We cannot talk about equity without talking about the very important role of early childcare and education. So the Starting Strong project at EDPC is also looking at what are the skills that teachers at these early levels, providing early intervention for the goal of equity, can play. And finally, I would like to mention the ISTP Forum, the International Summit on Teacher Profession. It's the only forum that sits together ministers and teacher unions. It's a very productive yearly meeting, which I very much encourage all of you to participate, because it's another moment in which teachers and ministers speak face to face without the pressure of having the media waiting outside to hear two different voices, and progress can be made. So these are some of the areas of work at EDPC. We learned during the pandemic that no machine replaces the human relationship in teaching, but we know that technology is out there and it has to be a help, not a replacement of this very unique human relationship that teaching and learning is about. And I'd like now to invite Wong Siew Hong to share on the TALIS inputs to our debate.
Thank you. So I'll now change my hat to as chair of the TALIS Governing Board, and to sell to you what TALIS has to offer, particularly in helping all of us work on our teacher policies and our teacher policy reforms. The most fundamental issue or the offerings of TELUS, as Joel has put it, is the fact that it captures the voices of teachers from almost 50 countries and over a whole array of subject matters that are close to the teacher's heart. We survey them on, their teacher identity, survey them on their attitude towards the work. We survey them on how they see society value them. We've surveyed them on their practices, and we survey them on many aspects of their work, their workload, and that set of data therefore provide very rich insights, not just of our own country, but I think the fact that we have got internationally comparable data is of great value when we are thinking about teacher policies. So just to give an example, in Singapore, we use the TELUS data to the hilt. We study every line and we look at every micro issue that TELUS has come up for us to benchmark our work and to evaluate them vis-a-vis other countries, as well as the work that we have done over the last 30 years. Just as a very simple example, we had mounted a massive mentoring programs for young teachers, for beginning teachers, sometime in 2009. So we wanted to find out if we are effective, if it's been efficacious, because we put in a lot of effort in terms of drawing up the analytical framework, getting teachers, senior teachers trained as mentor, then pairing them up with beginning teachers, and really offloading some of these teachers the time and the opportunity to be working with the young teachers. The kind of investment that we put in for the mentoring program is not insignificant. So how did we fare? And TELUS told us that we had almost 75% of our teachers saying that they have participated in mentoring and that it has been beneficial for them. And we contrast that against international comparable data, and we have shown ourselves to have done well, worthy of the kind of investment that we have put in. So what I'm trying to share with you here is that the TELUS data is indeed a very rich set of data, and we can really investigate so many issues, mentoring just being one of them. So I will offer to you the TELUS data from the past, as well as the launch of the new TELUS data that will come out from the 2024 study and cycle, which will be launched by October this year. Do take the opportunity to use that really as an opportunity to look at the data against how your policy reforms on teachers have or have not worked. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wong. I will now give the floor to Michelle Brunix, Chair of PISA. Please, Michelle.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to briefly share with you a little more insight around the 2022 PISA data. And the first one I want to talk to is really around the concept that Andreas raised around teacher support. And in 2022 PISA, students were asked about what support they received from their teachers in their mathematics lessons. And as an old maths teacher, a very important thing to be able to do is to reach out and support a whole range of students. But when I look at the questions that we've asked, it really goes to the heart of the profession, and that is that the teacher shows an interest in every student's learning, that the teacher gives extra help when students need it, and the teacher helps students with their learning, and that the teacher continues teaching until the students understand. And when students responded to that, what we saw in the PISA 22 results is that that teacher support is associated with students' higher performance, less anxiety, the proactive learning behaviour, more controlling one's own learning, so how to pay attention, and a higher motivation. And that's incredibly important. I think that really goes to the heart of the profession. I think what we've also seen is a decline in teacher support over the last decade. And again, just reflect back on the slide Andreas had around the increased administrative load the increase in compliance, the risk assessments, the program planning and reporting requirements that systems often put, and that takes teachers away from really their heartland. Another exclamation could be associated with the teacher shortage. And we know that school principals in 2022 reported a greater teacher shortage than experienced in 2018 in many of our education systems. However, when you look at student-teacher ratios, they were pretty stable. They perhaps even declined between 2018 and 2022 in most countries. So there's questions about principals' increased concern about teacher shortage may not have been because of a pure lack of the number of teachers, but maybe a whole lot of other reasons that sit behind teacher absenteeism, the quality teaching, an increasing number of students who need help, the digital distraction and taking teachers away, the changes in the role of teachers and expectation that communities put on teachers. The second issue I want to briefly talk to is about the use of digital resources. And we know that being able to tell if information online is credible and having good quality information is critical for navigating through an increasing digitised world. We know from PISA 2022 that only 51% of students in the OECD countries reported that they can easily access the quality of online information. That's related to the quality of online information. And we've also seen that 33% reported they can do so without some effort, so smaller percentage there. We've got some 9% of students struggling and 4% unable to judge the quality of online information at all. And that gives us really food for thought about as we move to the digital space. In contrast, 2 out of 3 students reported that they easily search and find relevant information online, and students' confidence about their digital skills is positively related to their practices regarding online information. But you have to note that about less than 50% of students reported that they discuss the accuracy of online information with their teachers or in class. And so that relationship and the conversation and the trust that goes alongside with teachers and their students. And I think that's a really important area that we probably need to look at strengthening about the conversations and the trust in the relationship. Students who believe that teachers in their schools, good news, they believe they have the necessary skills to use the digital devices in classes and are more likely. So when students believe that their teacher has a good set of digital skills, they're more likely to check the accuracy of the online information that they're drawing from. And I think that even holds true after accounting for students and schools' socioeconomic profile and students' performance in mathematics. So students believe that their teachers have sufficient digital literacy seems to be an important factor in their own digital literacy development. And finally, most students reported that teachers at their school have good digital skills, but there's a wide variation. So our colleagues here in Singapore, about 87% in Singapore agreed or strongly agreed that teachers have the necessary skills to use digital devices, while around 50% of students in Germany reported so. So I think the PISA 22 is another source of really strong evidence to support the notion that teachers are essentially developing students' digital literacy, and schools must prioritise equipping teachers with the necessary skills and resources to effectively integrate digital technologies into teaching practices that not only enhances student traditional learning outcomes, but better prepares them for the complexities of a digital age. So incredibly important. The relationship in both of those aspects, both the support of teachers and the use of digital and the quality of the online accuracy is really, really important in leading to better outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I will now give the floor to the Vice Chair of the Surrey Governing Board, Jeroen Baks. Jeroen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Harold. And first of all, I want to excuse Harold Hislop here as chair of SARI, but I'll do my best to replace him as best as I can. I want to start by echoing what Paulo said in his opening statement. There's a consensus here around the table that if we want good qualitative education for all pupils, that we are in need of strong, competent, motivated, engaged, and enough teachers. And let's that teacher profession be under pressure, as we learned from Andreas' presentation here, by shortages, but also by many societal changes that put pressure on the profession. And I want to refer here, as I represent SARI here, of course, to the important work of Transshaping Education and the 21st Century Children projects that provide us insights on mega trends that are coming to us and that will change, will have an impact on education and on the teacher profession. Now, SARI has a long-standing tradition in research and innovation projects on teachers, teaching, training of teacher training and professionalization. And I have too much information. I could fill here the whole session. I won't do it, Diana, don't worry. But I'll keep it to two major policy lines that are, for me, crucial to find a way out of this conundrum on the long run. And the first one comes out of the recent project, New Professionalism and the Future of Teaching. And that is, we learned from that project that it is very important to give teachers the chance, the space to develop themselves as real professionalists. And that starts with a very strong basic fundament, a teacher training that focuses again on what is the basics of learning, an evidence-based approach there on how brains work, how our children learn. And I'm happy that cognitive psychologists are back, have again a voice in the debate on education. And I was also happy to see that this item, how humans learn, was on the agenda of the joint EVPC SARI session we had last Wednesday. But the complexity of the teaching profession is not in how children learn, but in to bring this learning into practice, of course. And from SARI projects as Governing Complex Education Systems and Strategic Education Governments, and more recently strengthening the impact of education research, we learned that education is a complex system where there are no direct solutions that always work to address all challenges that teachers face in the classroom. It is important then that teachers can make choices that ideally are drawn, of course, to a multitude of information, in the first place, evidence from research, but also taking into account context elements as school and pupil characteristics, the specific learning conditions, and of course, their own professional experience. So teaching, therefore, cannot be led by a simple recipe book, and teachers, from my perspective, therefore, can never be, and I also mentioned that, can never be replaced by learning platforms, computers, or not even by AI in the future, I think. Now, teaching asks for an evidence-informed approach that implements that next to the robust basic teacher training, we have to invest in more research on learning practices and the knowledge brokerage agencies that translate knowledge towards teachers. But we also have to stop, I think, and that's also what the New Professionalism project learned us, to stop to prescribe what teachers should do, to take away all the professional autonomy with standard textbooks, with top-down developed manuals, and with giving them lots of administrative burden that takes away their time from what is their core job, teaching. So from teachers on the other side, we learned that we can ask to be more open to new developments in society, to be more resilient to these new developments, but also to be more self-reflective on their own professional handling, because that's the essence of being a professional, being good educated, to invest in your own continuous professional development, and to have an open, critical mind, critical about all new education and also the existing practices, but also about yourself and your own professional performances. This brings me to the last two lessons we learned out of the New Professionalism project, and that's the first one is that being a professional also means that you have to work not on your own, but in a broader school team. In too many education systems and too many teachers still think that they have to find all the solutions on their own, by themselves, and that they have to solve all the challenges they face. And we know from the important author, he's a historian as myself, Harari, that the most successful societies in history were those who could work together. And I think that is an important lesson we also have to take into account in further discussions here in the next 2 days. And the last comment is on more policy advice. We already did that today. We talk about teachers as there are one homogeneous group. But the most important thing I learned of the new professionalism project is by working with personas and to put these personas into different types of scenarios, policy scenarios, is that there are many, many differences, of course, among teachers, that the group is very heterogeneous, and that we really have to think about policy on teacher, taking into account all these differences between the group of teachers. To that.
Thank you very much, Jeroen, for sharing the SERI reflections and work. Back to you, Andres, for your contribution to this panel discussion.
Yes, thank you very much. You actually heard some really interesting perspectives from our OECD committees, you know, the voice of teachers themselves in Thales, the voice of students and to some extent parents in PISA, the strategic foresight in SERI, and I think also your reflections, Jeroen, on the nature of professionalism. It's not just about, you know, expanding teacher supply, it's about the nature of professionalism, the work culture, and the EDPC's perspective on public policy. And I think, Joao, your emphasis on equity. I mean, it's not just about matching teacher supply on average. We see huge misalignments between the quality of teachers and the nature of the challenges. I mean, most education systems around this table, you know, teach students from wealthy backgrounds equipped with the best teachers, and students from the disadvantaged backgrounds ending up with the least experienced teachers. That's the reality, that, you know, it is not just average supply and average. There's a huge issue for us to address, better alignment of resources with needs. But what is also quite clear is that sometimes the voices of teachers and students and public policy are at odds. And if you can't match up what, you know, young people tell us about their needs and the way they feel supported by their teachers, and what teachers in Thales tell us about that same story. And I think it's our role here to match those voices, to bring them together, to align those different perspectives. And that's not an easy task. And I give you another example. I think most of the committees have highlighted the social nature of the teaching profession, the importance of relationships. But you look at the evidence and data, in fact, we've seen an increasing trend towards commodifying education. Students becoming consumers of learning, teachers are seen as a kind of service providers, and parents are seen as a kind of client. That is the reality. In fact, most education systems around this table have seen a decline in parental support, a decline in teacher support. You know, the data that I presented you here from 22, if you look at them as 2018, in most countries, teachers have become less supportive of their students. Parents have become less engaged. Schools invest less time and resources in engaging with parents. In a way, we underline the social nature of the profession, but it seems, you know, many things have gone the other way around. I think it's our role here to bring those different perspectives. You know, I don't even want to start about technology and so on, but what is also quite interesting is that, you know, Joe, you presented this as a global challenge, but it's actually quite a nuanced picture. You do have education systems where teaching is an incredibly attractive profession, where it is highly valued by society, where it has actually become, or even some countries, and I'm looking at a country like Iceland that's been able to turn this around, where teachers used to be a last resort for people, and now you see more young people actually going into teacher education. So I think this is also important for us, despite, you know, a global challenging trend, to identify what stands behind this. And when you actually look at those systems that are on a promising track, you can see first that they put systems, structures, and support in place that publicly elevate the spending of teachers. Now, the basic principle really is that every interaction that teachers have with their communities, with their societies, builds and banks social capital. And that is the principal driver of the status of the teaching profession. No? Building those kinds of interactions. And I'm again saying this because, you know, there's a trend for schools to outsource sort of work with students that is not teaching to other professionals. No? Schools are hiring, you know, assistants, specialists, also on. But what we actually see that it's often, you know, reduce and narrow the profile of teachers, whereas education systems that are very, very good at that, you know, give teachers actually the responsibility to be not just a good educator, a good instructor, but also a good coach, a good mentor, a good facilitator, a great social worker. And so I think, again, you know, how to keep those perspectives together is really important. The public policy in the countries that are successful actively support teachers to make a difference in their communities, not just in their classrooms. And it's also always visible that their interactions with families, with parents, are not deficit driven, focusing on troubleshooting, but asset driven, focusing on, you know, how we can work on this together, and where, you know, partnership with transparency becomes a paradigm of accountability rather than, you know, administrative accountability. You build the relationships, you build the trust that energizes and elevates the standing of teachers. And the second factor is, and this is, I think, where, you know, Xu Hong really made some really interesting point, is how we organize the work of teachers. Now, the opportunities that teachers have for professional growth. And our TALIS data shows very clearly there's often a gap between how this is organized and what teachers themselves feel is driving self-efficacy. There's a disconnect between the kind of, you know, professional development. A lot of this is still organized in the form of courses, whereas teachers tell you what matters for me is what I do with my colleagues at school, the environment I have. So this alignment, I think, is really important. Or, you know, you look at this by area. Teachers feel insufficiently prepared to teach with technologies, to address multicultural kind of settings and things like this. So a better alignment of the environment that public policy creates and what teachers need, I think, is very important. And this is where the voice of teachers, the voice of students, the voice of parents can really, really help us to understand. And you can see also, again, from the TALIS data, the more teachers teach jointly as a team, the more they observe other teachers' classes, the more they take part in collaborative professional learning, the greater their sense of self-efficacy, the greater their sense of job satisfaction. And once again, job satisfaction is better predicted by that environment than by the material conditions. Now, it is very clear that, you know, and many of you have highlighted this, the quality of education can never exceed the quality of teachers, and the quality of teachers can never exceed the environment that you create for actually helping them, you know, find their profession and develop in this. And we, I think, also in this dialogues can set the scene in a way for, you mentioned it already, the ISTP, the International Summit of the Teaching Profession, where we will have ministers and union leaders coming together in Iceland in March next year to actually look at how to put that on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreas. Before I end the public session, Michelle, would you in 1 minute tell us about, we've reported on what we are doing, and yesterday we had a very interesting and fruitful chairs retreat. What are we not doing? What are the blind spots that emerged at our conversation in which we could move forward?
Thank you. I think some of the things are closer collaboration between the level 1 chair work and how we can better get synergies between the work that makes sense for education systems out there. One classic example, when we talked about social and emotional skills, and we talked about the way in which we report data, and how in PISA we report the maths, the science up front, and then we lag a bit on the other. The important bit of actually doing that as a wholesome thing gave a much fuller narrative and picture for systems, and sent certainly important messages about the valuing of those things. We talked about subgroups and how we can look at data. We talked about strategic alignment between some of the planning and future work that we could engage in together. And I think, you know, as a group of level 1 chairs, it was wonderful to be able to spend the whole day sitting and reflecting, learning on what each other are doing, and to be able to see those connecting things that will come out in some very tangible actions that we will work forward with.
Thank you very much, Michelle. This marks the end of the public live stream. Thank you, Jeroen, Sue-Hong, Michelle, Andreas, for this panel discussion. And thank also the online audience for your participation. We are all encouraged to access the Education Policy Outlook report at the OECD